Hello, everybody. My name is Clayton Weimers. I am the U.S. Director for Reporters Without Borders based in Washington, D.C. RSF is an international NGO devoted to press freedom and to the right to information. And you may ask yourself, why does a press freedom group care about AI? And that's because press freedom these days has to be thought of as more than just about journalist safety. That, of course, is a very important part of our work, but increasingly we see our role as not just protecting journalists, but protecting journalism. And there are a whole host of threats or potential threats to journalism that are going to take us all down with them if we don't address them. One of those is AI. But AI can also be a really tremendous tool for journalism, and I think a lot of people already know all of that, so I'm not breaking new ground here. But we've engaged in a few different projects in the last couple years in AI, and I want to talk a little bit about them and also talk about some of the takeaways we've learned engaging in this work. So I'll level set first. I am not a technologist. This was originally supposed to be a two-person presentation. My colleague sadly couldn't join me, so if there are questions that are more technical in nature, I might have to pass you off to him via email. Second, I'm not a slide artist. You'll see very soon. These slides are not very good. But let's get into it. I want to start with some bad examples of how we've seen AI rolled out in newsrooms. And I don't do this to name and shame certain media outlets. There's going to be mistakes made because AI is still an experiment in progress in addition to being a forward deployed product. It's more about how can we learn from the mistakes and what's been done poorly. But I really break down the mistakes into two types, the good faith mistakes and the bad faith mistakes. And good faith mistakes, you're not ill-intentioned, but you tried something and it didn't work, and in hindsight, we can look at exactly why it didn't work and learn from it. And the bad faith mistakes, I'm a little less forgiving of because you should have known better. We'll get into those too. So, a lot of the good faith mistakes come down to a lack of editorial supervision. It's newsrooms that are looking to take shortcuts. They're not putting a lot of thought into where they're going. They're not adding value for their audience. And this leads to things like AI slop and just really poor quality outputs. And I think we're all maybe familiar with some of these examples where different digital sites have been caught essentially just creating AI content that was nonsense, that didn't have any bearing in reality. And so the key here is you need editorial supervision. This is still journalism. You can't just let an AI system loose to produce content and not check anything. I think this is basic common sense, and yet we keep seeing it over and over again across multiple platforms in different countries. Another good faith mistake is pretending that AI is a neutral arbiter. AI systems are not neutral. They have all of the biases that we inject into them based on the data that we feed them. And so last year, the LA Times tried to use an AI model to essentially evaluate the bias in its coverage. And it would put a little message at the top that sort of tried to contextualize whether or not a piece might be biased in one direction or the other. I understand the inclination to do that. But what it leads to is these really bizarre outputs like the AI model defending the KKK. You don't want to see that on your newspaper. And again, the bottom line is this is a product that was deployed without editorial oversight. It was AI-developed content that a human being did not check before it got published on the website. And that is what leads to these mistakes. You're also going to increasingly see a pretty confusing and difficult to suss out problem, which is fake content about real events. And so there was this viral video of the bombing of the Evin prison in Iran. This was a real event that happened during the war between Israel and the bombing campaign that Israel undertook in Iran. But fake videos about a real bombing were circulating online and then taken up by media. And so media outlets need to be really vigilant about making sure that the content that's being submitted to them is authentic. You need processes in place with experts on staff in order to make these determinations, sometimes very quickly, because this has a huge impact on the trust and reliability of your media outlet. You're covering a real story, and broadly speaking, your content is true in a vague general sense, but because the video itself is fake, now you've just cast doubt on the entire story, and it's really hard to get that trust back, even if everything you're else doing is spot on. Then there's the bad faith mistakes. And like I said, these are the ones where they really should have known better. AI-generated images. Don't use AI-generated images when you can use real images, and don't use AI-generated images without telling your audience what you're doing. So this was an example of a media organization in the United States that was doing a story about women in the armed services, and they used this AI-generated image of women soldiers, but it's fake. It wouldn't have been very hard for them to get a real photo of this, but for whatever reason they didn't, and this caused a mini scandal at the time. And this is the kind of thing that just undermines the trust of your audience. And then another bad faith mistake is outsourcing your fact checking. I think I'm probably preaching to the choir here. I think 99% of the people at this festival understand this very well. But you can't just trust the robots to do your fact checking for you. You need to keep humans in the loop at all times. And then, once again, more preaching to the choir, don't replace your journalists. I'm sure everyone is on the same page here that we don't want to see journalists fired so that robots can do their work for them. But it does bear repeating because we are seeing a lot of media executives get tempted to replace the work that humans are doing with AI. And it does need to be said, it's not a good idea. A couple years ago, it was thought that we have these problems with AI generating bad content, it's not very reliable, but it's going to get better over time. Counterintuitively, what we're now learning is that AI systems and LLMs are getting more powerful, but they're actually just making the misinformation more powerful. They're generating it more. And that's because the foundations of many of these LLMs, which are not designed with journalism in mind, are just built on infrastructure that doesn't value information integrity or provenance or transparency. And so when you don't have that foundation and you just keep amping up the capabilities, all you're doing is amping up the misinformation. So once again, I'm going to sound like a broken record throughout this whole thing. Keep humans in the loop at all times. So if I leave you with nothing else, those are my takeaways. Don't take humans out of the loop. Don't mislead your audience. Be transparent. Remember that AI is both a deployed product and an experiment, and that mistakes are going to be made. And that information produced by journalists is still more accurate than information produced by machines. All right, so I'm going to pivot a little bit to what RSF has been doing on this. A little while ago, we released what we call the Paris Charter on AI and journalism. Essentially, this is an ethical framework that anyone can use in a newsroom to think about how they want to create their own policies for how AI is being deployed in their newsrooms. At this point, I think most media outlets do have policies in place, and some are very good, and some are fine, and some need work. They're going to need to be continually revisited and updated. But the point of the Paris Charter, which we developed with 16 partner organizations around the world, is that it is so foundational that it shouldn't need to be updated, at least not anytime soon. And really, it's all about staying grounded in the ethics of journalism that everyone was trained on. So this is what I call the world's worst slide, or at least the worst slide I have ever made, so I apologize for this wall of text. But I did want to get these 10 principles up here, and I won't just read through all of them. You can go Google Paris Charter AI. You can take a picture of this right now. And everything I've been saying so far is basically summarized in these principles here. So I would encourage you, if you're interested, go online, read the charter. It's not very long. If you only have time for 10 sentences, these are the 10 sentences you need to read. So now that we've talked about principles, we'll talk about some good examples that we've seen. One of the best ways to use AI in journalism that I've been seeing is data journalism, because you can use AI systems to tell stories that were never possible to tell before. I love this Washington Post story about political ads in the last US election. It analyzed thousands of video and radio ads to put together a common narrative that they were seeing across all the different advertising. There was just no way that you could have done this before AI, because there was a tremendous amount of data that was separated in so many different places, and they used a custom-made system to tell a really unique story. I also really love CalMatter's Digital Democracy Project. This is a one-stop shop where anyone can basically put in a query or have a chat in order to search through everything that California politicians ever do, whether it's a speech they make on the floor in Sacramento, whether it's a hearing they held, whether it's a bill they introduced. All of it is in one place, and it really puts the power in the hands of the audience to make use of what is otherwise an incomprehensible amount of data. Which leads me to my other example, and I did not intentionally choose two Washington Post examples. I didn't notice that until I was getting ready to go on stage. But tools that empower your audience. They have an AI chatbot where you can just go engage with every piece of journalism that the Washington Post has produced going back to 2016. Again, these are ways that enhance your journalistic output, that enhance the role that the audience can take in engaging with it. That's good AI. AI anchors for safety. This one's a little different. This is La Chama, or the girl. She is one of the hosts of Venezuela Retweets, which was created by several Venezuelan media organizations to protect journalists who were under threat. This is an AI news anchor who presents the news, and she starts every news broadcast with saying, "Hi, you may have noticed, I'm not real, I'm AI generated." So, I did say earlier, don't replace your journalists with AI. Well, now I'm breaking that own rule, because this is actually a good example of why to do it. In a country where journalists' lives are regularly threatened, you can actually leverage AI tools to anonymize them and keep them safe. But the key is doing it transparently. The audience is not being misled here. Everyone knows exactly what is happening. Everyone knows exactly why. Again, humans are in the loop. Nothing that the AI anchor is being said is being generated by AI. It's being generated by human journalists doing journalistic work. It's just being presented by an AI avatar. So again, whatever you do, be transparent when using AI in the newsroom. And you should always be thinking about how can you communicate what you're doing with AI to your audience. Publish a page that details your policies on when you're using AI and when you're not using AI, and please make it easy to find. I looked through a lot of different media organizations' websites when I was preparing this to look for good examples of these statements. And some media organizations just make these things impossibly hard to find. If they're buried on a legal page somewhere, the audience is never going to see it. No one's ever going to find it. It needs to be very visible. And then I'll also say, one of the important things about being transparent is that you need to own your mistakes. Mistakes are going to happen. So there was a scandal with some US publications recently about a couple different outlets running content from a submitter who turned out to be a con artist who was using AI to churn out inauthentic content. And some pretty major news outlets got taken for a ride on multiple stories by someone who turned out not to exist. But one of them was Wired. And what Wired did when it figured this out was it published a very long, very detailed article of exactly what went wrong, how they got fooled, what their processes were to prevent that previously, how they failed, and what processes they were going to implement going forward to make sure it didn't happen again. Do that. People are very accepting if you own up to your mistakes. People are not going to be accepting if you try to run or hide from your mistakes. That's how you lose your audience, and they'll never come back. I don't think Wired lost a single member of their audience for that incident. So I also want to talk about custom-made AI projects for journalists. Like I said, a lot of newsrooms are already experimenting with these. We're also doing this at RSF. We launched something called the Spinoza Project. And again, this is a project of my colleagues who was not able to join us, so I will just run through this a little quickly if you'll bear with me. But we wanted to create an AI tool with the ethics of journalism built right in so that journalists could use it. And in beta mode right now, it's trained on climate data so that climate journalists can go in and sift through these vast amounts of data to find stories that are otherwise very difficult to find. And the key is, we're trying to create a tool that augments journalism rather than replaces the work that journalists are already doing. This is a companion to other tools you might use. Also, in doing this, we wanted to start a conversation with other practitioners and partners in the field to find out, what are the best ways we can be deploying AI, and as a nonprofit, how can we be helpful to the journalistic community and create tools that people actually want to use and that are going to benefit journalism. And the takeaways, not going to be surprising. I've been talking about this the whole time. You got to involve the journalists every step of the way. The data quality and quantity are equally important. You don't necessarily need all of the data in the world to make a good small or medium language model that will serve your custom-made purposes. And in fact, sometimes you want to be a little choosier about the data that goes in because there are considerations like cost and efficiency. But that's going to be up to each individual project. The journalist skills should be leveraged to ensure the data integrity and to make sure that you're not getting a garbage in, garbage out situation with the model. And it also, a big takeaway is it's possible to have ethical AI. There's a lot of a lot of the major LLMs out there, I wouldn't say are ethical when it comes to journalism. They don't have journalistic ethics at their core. But we can build the tools, and many, many different organizations are already doing so. And I think basically every newsroom should be thinking about, can we do this ourselves? It's not actually that hard. So what do we need to do next? I really have to emphasize here that it's not all on newsrooms. You own what you do, but at the end of the day, big tech needs to get on board with this. And I know here and now, that doesn't sound realistic. The tech companies are definitely turning away from what I would consider ethical output and obligations towards information integrity. But these things are a pendulum, and I expect that pendulum to swing back. And just as everyone is turning against content moderation right now, I think it's going to go too far, and we're going to come the other way. And we'll need to be ready, because what we need are guardrails when we're designing these systems. We need accountability and liability. We need incentives to create ethical AI. We need democratic oversight of AI systems. And if you want to get into detail on this, I really recommend the Forum on Information and Democracy. They put together a working group with some great AI proposals for policymakers, not necessarily for newsrooms. And we need authenticity standards. There's a growing problem of deep fakes of journalists, being used from everything to spreading misinformation to, schlocking diet pills on TikTok. And this is a huge problem for the credibility of the news industry, because, as a journalist with a public image, that image is everything. And if we can't get this part of it right, that's going to be a huge problem for journalism. And also, we need authenticity standards at the publisher level to make it easier to detect AI content before it's published. And that'll help with some of the problems I talked about before. And then that's it. There was supposed to be a thank you slide here, but like I said, I'm not very good at slides. So thank you very much.